working just fine. Oh, let me just double check that. Yep, looks like it is functioning. We have right now several of our members over here on the Twitch side. We have, let's see here, we have Ha, Rolling Chairs, who will be joining us for this whole ordeal. We have Forgiven, Bastion, and Light Fury. Welcome, one and all. This is going to be an interesting discussion because I very much enjoy the world of Star Wars, and I initially was not too keen on actually bringing up any sort of thoughts or opinions on it. And then the other day, I actually came across somebody who was like mentioning that the show was the best one they had ever seen. They very much enjoyed it, and I thought, well, okay, I gotta probably just bite the bullet and give this a go. So thank you to everyone for coming along and listening to what we have to say over here, and hopefully you will have the opportunity to actually add to the conversation as you see fit. Can't hear the stream right now, but did you go live on YouTube on purpose? Yes. Can't hear me. Testing 1 2 3. Can you hear me? 3. All right, you can hear me over here. I'm testing over on YouTube side as you see fit. Okay, yep, it is working over there too. All right, so everything seems to be functioning appropriately. Well, let me pull up my notes right here. I want to go through a couple of main points of what to expect in this discussion. First off, this is not a Disney bashing session. I have my problems with Disney. Always will, basically, because I am very much passionate about Disney and Star Wars. So when I see both of them working together and not quite panning out the way that I envisioned, it is painful. But I'm not too upset. But I'm not so upset about it that I'm going to go out and try and, well, just rant for the sake of ranting. I want to give constructive criticism, but I also want to highlight the things that I saw that actually worked out well. This is a fairly laid-back conversation in the sense of that, compared to some previous discussions, this doesn't have necessarily a point-by-point script that we're going to be going through. This is going to be very much a chance to bounce ideas off of each other, and then we're going to dive into some of the ideas that I proposed on how they could have improved the story. But without further ado, let us welcome Rolling Chairs to this conversation. How you doing, Rolling Chairs?
Hello. It's good to be here.
All right, and if there is any problem with the audio or the visuals, please be sure to mention it. Right now, I am flying blind. I don't have another monitor over here to be able to tell if there is any problems that are happening. So the chat is the only way I can really be able to know for sure if there's any sort of issues. For a start, Rolling Chairs, what was your initial opinion of Mandalorian before going into it?
Before going into this season, I really enjoyed the show. I think it was the most successful thing Disney has created in the Star Wars IP, and that's just pretty much a fact. And I was really happy with where they left things off in season 2. And with Book of Boba Fett, I think they backtracked in some of the things they accomplished in the show. But I'm happy that they're acknowledging some of the things that they're backtracking on in this show, even though I might not be the most happy about it. Like such things as Mandalorian, Din Djarin taking off his helmet and things like that. To say goodbye to Grogu. But I'm happy that that was acknowledged, and it's kind of a love-hate relationship. Like, there are some things I wish they didn't do, and some things I wish they did do. But I was pretty happy with the first 2 seasons. I'm kind of excited to see where they take it from here. I think this season's going to be a huge season in whether or not these two characters can truly carry Star Wars for the next few years.
Yeah, the whole, well, the background to Mandalorian is one that I have never really been able to truly understand. As I understand, so much of it is dependent upon the Clone Wars series that took place.
Mm-hmm.
I'm someone who likes quality too much, and when I saw the cartoon style of it, I was so turned off. I could not watch it. I tried sitting down to see a couple of episodes, and after a couple I was like, nope, not doing this. But one thing I did notice is that it's a very different story, an incredibly different story than what George Lucas had intended. And I actually heard some interviews that kind of confirmed that. I don't have the interviews to pull up over here, but they are out there on the web that you can be able to find them. They are fewer than they used to be, though. I think maybe that's by design, but that's for another discussion. But Disney's world of Mandalorian, while intriguing, still doesn't quite feel like Star Wars to me. But it is a good sci-fi adventure story. And in that case, I can understand why so many people do like it. Because even though it is so wildly different, that someone like me, who pretty much looks at the prequels and the original trilogy as the gold standard to be able to measure by, to have a show that doesn't do that is too much for me to be able to get behind. But they do it in such a way that if I disconnect the idea of it being Star Wars, I very much enjoy it. And I can understand why people who are not like hardcore fans are going to still enjoy this without letting it color their love of Star Wars.
And this is
one
where
thing you also said.
Yep.
Actually, one last thing that you said before you go on to that thought. You mentioned about things like the helmet and whatnot. That is indeed a part that I can, like, I'm not a fan of Mando having the rule of keeping the helmet, but I can understand why people with that background of the lore would actually have that opinion. I'm more inclined to look at stuff like this of Jango Fett and think that is the gold standard, that a Mandalorian has the helmet on and off. But for someone who watches the animated series or Disney's Star Wars, they're going to be more inclined to look at this as the gold standard. I don't see either one as necessarily good or bad. I see one as maybe a little bit more consistent, but I'm no longer in the camp of where I adamantly stand against that sort of approach. So you were saying?
Yeah, this is where me and you very much differ in Star Wars. Like, I grew up on the Clone Wars and I really enjoyed it. So I in my opinion, and many people who enjoy the Clone Wars, the Mandalore arc of the Clone Wars show is one of the best parts of the whole series. And one thing I really like about it is in the Clone Wars show, Bo-Katan, who's in the Mandalorian, was viewed as an extremist, someone who's trying to bring back the values that Mandalore was built upon. But now she's kind of taken the opposite. She kind of, after the fall of Mandalore, we kind of see her take the approach that her sister has taken, where she was just kind of trying to unite Mandalorians any way possible. And there are some, pretty much, Din Djarin has taken her role. He's a part of like this extremist Mandalorians who are trying to rebuild the Mandalorian faith pretty much in the way it was intended and originally created. And it's kind of interesting to see her progression from the Clone Wars, where the cult has pretty much, because she was people called her a cult in the way she was viewed in Mandalore. Like, they were almost viewed as terrorists by trying to bring back these ideals. And he's kind of taken that opinion now since the fall of Mandalore. And I think she feels somewhat responsible for the fall of Mandalore because she helped, or her cult almost was pretty much a part of bringing Darth Maul into Mandalore, which ultimately led to their downfall as a city. He ended up overtaking their city and ruling it, and I really like the progression. My only complaint with how they handle Bo-Katan in the Mandalorian is they understand that not everyone has seen the Clone Wars. So many of the things she says are trying to catch people up on what happened because not everyone knows everything that happened in Clone Wars. So it's just her repeating stuff that I already know, and it's not as good as seeing it in the Clone Wars, is the way I view it. And I hope in this season they take Bo Katan to the next level where we really see her kind of taking action and her whole opinion on the cult and how she interacts with them. And, well, she refers to them as a cult. And I'm really excited to see. I think Bo Katan, I think this is a make or break season for her because I was a huge fan of her in the Clone Wars. And this season is going to be a huge determinant on many of the characters, and I think this show as a whole of where it could go.
So now that's actually an interesting thing they bring up, and we're going to actually approach this later on, because right now this is still the initial feelings of this. But you mentioned about Bo-Katan, and Bo-Katan is a character that I, as someone who did not watch the animated series, I have no connection to. And her time on screen has not necessarily contributed to my understanding of the backstory. And that's something that
I agree.
Is so very crucial to building up a world, is having the ability to introduce a character and instantly know their backstory. And I'm going to say that in that sense, Favreau is not too far off the reservation, because George Lucas did the same thing. I don't think many people know Jango Fett's backstory. He did not go into a whole lot of detail. He gave a lot of ideas of where they came from, about why they would have actually, why Jango would have basically defiled the Mandalorians by becoming the prototype for a clone army. And so in that sense, George Lucas did not build up the backstory like he should have. He wanted to be inferred. In the same way, Favreau's doing the same sort of thing, but I feel like it's disconnected because it's not building upon the lore that George Lucas presented. Instead, he's presenting it based upon his backstory, stuff that he did for the Clone Wars. And I feel like there's a disconnect. Like this is part of the divergence that has started to take place. Not necessarily bad, but it definitely makes two camps. And so when you have those two camps, well, actually probably made three camps. When you have those camps, it makes people very passionate about those different sides of it. And it gets really hard to try and have a unified front to try and really build up a story. But now I want to take a moment to kind of look at The Mandalorian as it was scene by scene. But first, I just want to mention some things. With this first episode that took place, I very much enjoyed it in many ways. Past season openings were not very strong. This is the strongest by far. Yet compared to what it should be, I still think it's a shell of what it needs to truly become an enduring classic. Throughout the show, Disney does a lot of, well, things that we as maybe people post Bob Iger's influence can look at all these things and realize his direction and impact on how Disney does business. One of them is like product placement. There was a lot of product placement throughout the entire show. Not necessarily bad, but you could tell very specifically how they would place items around the scene. what objects were designed with this idea of being sold at places like Galaxy's Edge, things like that. And since we have multiple seasons to gauge from so far, we kind of know that this is likely going to be the case with some things. Like, for example, the Gordian Shard that appears in this. The Gordian Shard, I feel, is designed very much to be sold at Galaxy's Edge, probably as a collector's item. There's other things that... like the cheap, if you notice, there's cheap Mandalorian helmets. And actually, I'm going to bring up the footage right now, and I'm going to go back here. The cheap child Mandalorian helmets, those are designed with cheapness in mind, especially when you compare them to the others of the scene. You can tell that they're designed to look that way because chances are they're going to be wanting to sell those. So, because of that, it just makes it a little obvious to those of us who have seen Disney's practices so far and realizing this is probably going to be the pattern moving forward. They're probably going to grab things like this, and thus the way that they're implemented into the story don't feel very much like they're building upon the lore as much as they're things that Disney says, we want to sell this, find a way to put it in there. If they wrote it based upon story first, I think they would fit a lot better and it wouldn't feel so out of place. But whereas you have some helmets that look very realistic, things that are made of metal that shine in the sun, things like that, but then you have this very much muted coloration. You're realizing, oh, they don't want to give children like expectations of getting something that's like really authentic and full of colors and whatnot. I'm having trouble trying to find that moment where the kids are running up the side of the hill. But I saw it when the kids were kind of running off to the side and realizing just how very cheap they looked, and thought this is all about product placement first and foremost. There are some other things that Disney introduced into this episode that also felt like it was trying to make the world more interconnected. And that's something I very much am grateful for. Disney did a good job at doing this. I felt like they've skipped out on this a few too many times in the past with everything they've done, whether it was their movies or their series or even their books or games. And that is trying to make their world feel interconnected. And some of them worked out really well, others not so much. It was things that I, as someone who likes to study the stuff based upon lore, looked at some of these elements and thought, this is exactly what you want. You want things that tease a greater story that you want to actually dig in and learn more. The Gordian Shard is a good example. Another example, let me see if I can find it, is the Purgle whales. That was actually a very interesting scene to me. It had something where I had heard about them, and I actually wanted to see more. I wanted to actually learn a little bit more about what was actually transpiring in this scene. Even though I knew the general backstory, I wanted to see Disney flesh it out. That's good. And I hope they kind of take cues off of this moving forward. Introduce lore aspects, but then dig into it more later on. So that way you're not just teasing something for the sake of teasing it. You're actually teasing it because you're actually going to build upon it. That's what I hope they do.
Yeah, I really like the Purga whales as well. They were the first time I saw them was in the show Rebels, and they actually take part in saving the life of a Jedi, and they were it was very much a background thing in the Rebels, which somehow saved the life of a character that we grew to love in the show. But they definitely did play a crucial part in him surviving, and seeing them pop up in this show, I was like, oh, whoa, like it was almost like a nostalgia type thing. I was like, oh my gosh, I know this. And, seeing them pop up was awesome for me as well. And I hope it's not just some background thing in this show where they just show it for 1 second and it's like, yeah, this is the thing you all know and love from a previous show. Like I hope it's something that we see more of, and you know how they how they survive in this universe, how people interact with them, their effect on it, and everything. Uh, I hope it's not just some quick thing that they're showing, kind of as a memorabilia type thing. But we'll see. It's still early in the season.
Yeah, there's a concern I have, though, with elements like this. And it's that they're not really designed. Well, they're not really designing the show to have any sort of ability to stand on its own. I noticed this with this character. This character appears in Rise of Skywalker. He's the mechanic that is putting C-3PO, helping him to rewire him. It's an interesting scene. It doesn't really work out very well, but I don't think it is a bad character to try and to add into the story, but it required backstory and it needed the character to be fleshed out. They introduce it as if we're all supposed to know who this character is, and up until that point, nobody had an idea who that character was. It's not until The Mandalorian that we actually know that there's more to these characters and that they have filled in the void as mechanics after the fall of the Empire. That would have been a really good way to introduce them. And then, later on, show that they're coming into maturity into the story and they're actually being able to actually add something to the narrative. But right now, they don't. They didn't serve a purpose until now. And this is the problem. This is why I think that things like the whales struggle to actually give me confidence that this is going to work out. Because the whales are being introduced in the same sort of way as other elements of the Mandalorian series. Introduce an idea and make it so that you have to stay tuned, not for the rest of the Mandalorian, but for another show entirely. It's actually very well known how this model came to be. Just saying, I did not get this image. I just realized I needed to get this. This became the gold standard at Disney after, I think it was 2010, with the introduction of the Avengers. Marvel destroyed Disney's ability to build up independent lore stories. The reason why is because they realized if they could bait people to come back for different shows by introducing just one little bit of lore, then it was worth making entire films just to introduce one element of lore. The rest of the story could be complete garbage, but you would have people coming in because they wanted to hear the next little twist to the saga. It's the soap opera effect of where you want people to come in and kind of disconnect from the story as a whole, and you just want them to be listening for that one little bit of information about the story's overarching plot that you want to latch on to. And so thus they will forget everything else that was in that story. This is tried and true. And when I was working at Disney back in 2012-13, this was happening. And they were introducing this idea is that this is how we're going to make stories moving forward. It's going to be by formula. It's going to be by making sure that people are on the hook for the long haul. You don't want people to watch just The Mandalorian. You want to have people watch The Mandalorian, Book of Fett, the sequel trilogy, buy a couple of games, buy a couple of books, read the graphic novel, go to Galaxy's Edge, go to their hotel. Everything is designed to build upon this idea of that there's an overarching lore that is highly dependent upon all these different elements. So when you introduce a character and realize that this character might not be fleshed out in this story, it might be fleshed out a couple of seasons down the way, it's actually a bit discouraging, especially for people who are passive viewers. I'm very much someone who enjoys the lore. I'm willing to stick it out. But most people, most common people in this world, do not watch stuff like that. They don't have the time. They don't have the money. And so then elements like this will be forgotten, and they will think, well, that was a pointless story. They introduced a character, I didn't see any payoff. Well, in Disney's mind, that's because you had to stick around for later to actually see that character or that plotline pay off. And again, it all started because of these guys.
Yeah, we have very similar views on that, but I think for very different reasons. You think, from what I took from that, you hope, or you talk about in the case of the whales, that you hope it's not just something that they're just throwing in there, and you hope it's something we see more of in a way. But because
I heard that it might be, this is part of the rumor right now, is that they might be leading up to another series entirely. That's what I heard about.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason why I'm a little concerned.
Yeah, I get that. For me, I kind of take the opposite approach, where you hope that they do something with them in the future, and I hope that too. But I hope that they're not just taking advantage of something from the past show, something that people know and love from the Rebels show, which is great. It has one of the best scenes, one of my favorite scenes in Star Wars, some of my few favorite scenes in Star Wars, with Ahsoka Tano fighting Darth Vader, and she finds out that her master has become the part of the Sith and is this evil character, and she struggles with that. And with Obi-Wan killing Darth Maul finally, with the same mood that killed Obi-Wan's master and Qui-Gon Jinn. And I just have the fear that they're taking advantage of the memories people have from previous shows and love from previous content, that they're using that just to throw in to as a spice to distract people throughout this show. And I'm not saying they are going to do that, but I hope it's not just, they're not just throwing them in there just to distract people, almost like dangling keys or something, because those animals are very much a crucial part in saving the main character of the Rebels, the main Jedi, who's getting trained throughout the whole show. And if they're just throwing them in to be for people who watch Rebels like me, to be oh my gosh, this was in Rebels, it's just distracting you with a previous feeling that you've gotten from this. And yeah, I really like the animated content of Star Wars, which I don't think you've watched much of it, but I really like the Clone Wars and Rebels, just because I love Ahsoka Tano. And that scene with her in Rebels where she fights Darth Vader, just kiss. It's one of the best scenes in Star Wars for me.
Actually, that's
where she finds out her master.
So, I think this is the reason why there's such a divide in maybe the fan bases, and why why the Mandalorian story is in a gray area, because the Clone Wars completely turned the whole plotline of George Lucas's saga upside down, and characters like Ahsoka, unfortunately and fortunately, completely changed the story arc of Star Wars. This is the reason why I don't view it as canon. That's one of the reasons why I couldn't really get behind it, because I was far too invested into the story of Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. I was too invested into the story arc of the Jedi, and unfortunately, Ahsoka dismantled the entire world that was built up by George Lucas. And yet, at the same time, the character, which started off on very shaky ground, ended up becoming a classic, and people came to really love the character. I am neutral on the character. I don't think the character is necessarily good or bad, but I do think that the character does upset the story's original purpose. But it takes it in a different direction. That's why George Lucas himself mentioned that the Clone Wars are like the stories that people would tell their children. It's the idea of that it does have impact. Maybe it was based upon something that was true, but it doesn't have like the weight of lore. Because Ahsoka's presence totally destroys the whole order of the Jedi. Darth Maul surviving. The way that he survives, while I find it very compelling, and I think it was a great story arc, I don't think that it was done well. I think if George Lucas had written it, he would have added it in so that it would have fit the lore. Favreau does not like to fit the lore. He likes to break the lore and go with his own. But I think that works out well with him as well.
Yeah, and I agree that the presence of Ahsoka Tano and Darth Maul coming back has completely changed the lore from what is from the original mind of George Lucas, the creator of all of this. And there are some negatives that come with it, and I think there are some positives that come with it. I think I really liked the way that Ahsoka Tano and Darth Maul were done, because with Darth Maul, we saw his home planet, the way that he was rebuilt by the witches of his planet and stuff. Like, there's so many interesting things, and they had a relationship with Count Dooku, which really expanded on our relationship with Count Dooku instead of a few scenes he had in the prequel trilogy. There's some great things with it, and Obi-Wan ended up still avenging his master's death by killing Darth Maul in the end, so I still am happy with the way things were done with Darth Maul. But I can understand, even though I love Ahsoka and her character in the show and the progression that we see from a Padawan to eventually having to grow up during the fall. Because it's a very interesting thing seeing a Padawan during the collapse of the Jedi Order, and how, if they do survive Jedi Order 66, how that would happen. She ended up joining the Rebels and taking part, and how eventually, like, this fight against the Empire. But I can understand why people wouldn't like that at the same time, especially if you're a purist of George Lucas's lore, which is understandable. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because I'm pretty sure there's really supposed to be no Jedi that survived in George Lucas's vision. Like, it was really supposed to be.
It was supposed to be 2 and 2. They were all eliminated, so then it became Darth Vader and Darth Sidious, and then it became Obi-Wan and Yoda. And then the Force was in balance. And so if you have any other Jedi, that destroys the prophecy. That destroys why Luke tips the balance. And so things like that's why I love the lore, is because George Lucas wrote it with that, where you look at the sentences that are given and you start to sense a deeper meaning behind it. But if you just look at a sentence as a suggestion, then you can just write out anything, and thus it starts to change the direction. That's why when I look at The Mandalorian, I see this happening everywhere. It's happening with the way that they're implementing things from all trilogies, from all seasons of other shows, and it's being brought together with a design to try and reshape the world, not necessarily for the lore, but for profit. It's all about product placement. It's all about advertising the other series. So that's why I wish that when they do introduce characters, that they would do so with more meaning and purpose. Bastian actually is describing where I heard this rumor. He mentions that the rumor is that the Ahsoka show for the Purgo whales, the rumor is that the Ahsoka show is where she's going to go look for a character from the Rebels show, and it has
Ezra Bridger.
Yeah, it'll start to connect with the story of Thrawn, which again that's an interesting story in itself. I know that a lot of people are big fans of the Thrawn trilogy, and so when people see Easter eggs for it, they get all excited. I'm someone who is more inclined to actually go with what George Lucas originally said was going to happen afterwards, but that will be another discussion for another day, because I think it's a big opportunity that Disney's wasting, and I'm more grieved the fact that they're not taking this direction. But again, that'll be for later on.
I think they're trying to take the pace. I think they're trying to take the slow pace to it, because they're trying to build it up for fans who haven't watched Rebels or Clone Wars, because you really have to watch Clone Wars to understand Ahsoka, who interacted with Ezra Bridger in Rebels and the creation of the Rebels. Like, she was like this hidden agent and stuff. Who was like, since she was a Jedi who was trying to survive after the purge of Jedi, pretty much, she went into hiding, and like she was like this anonymous agent within the Rebels. And back to what I was originally saying, like with Ahsoka, I understand that she changed the war dramatically, and that was Dave Filoni's doing. But I don't think it really harms the story, because I feel like there would be, like, if we're speaking realistically, I think there would be many Jedi who would survive the purge of Jedi, and who would try and go on. There would be Jedi who would go on and fight and but be smart about it, like Ahsoka, or there would be Jedi who would just cower away and like just die off on a planet where they can't be found. I don't think it's realistic that in this whole galaxy all of them would die, even though that's not George's original vision, which isn't happy to people. But there are some things that Dave Filoni has done that I really enjoy, and some things that I can understand the disagreements with. But
it's mostly about
impact. I really like
Jess mentions right here actually a good point, which is for Jess in this case she couldn't get behind Clone Wars because Ahsoka's existence in the Clone Wars directly conflicts with the way that the Jedi Council treats Anakin in Episode 3, which, again, that's a huge part of it. Anakin is a Padawan.
In what way?
He's a Padawan. He's not a master. He's treated as basically a walking landmine. Everyone is scared of him because they don't know what's going to happen with the prophecy. As the war continues, they get more and more nervous, and they start kind of pushing him away. And people like Mace Windu start looking at him and start suspecting that he might be the downfall of the Jedi. He doesn't come out and say it directly, but he gives looks throughout the movie. He gives hints in his dialogue about how I don't trust him. And so thus the Jedi Council would never want to have have Anakin Skywalker taking on an apprentice. But there is a way they could have done it. And this is the reason why Filoni frustrates me. He takes his story, whatever it is, and adds in the direction that he wants, and forgets basically the plot lines that he could have taken advantage of that George Lucas originally set, that would not upset the story, that would have actually added real weight to a character. Ahsoka, yes, very popular. And I think her popularity is the reason why Filoni's vision has changed the whole direction of Star Wars, and why we will never get to see George Lucas's original vision come to fruition. I grieve that. I very much grieve that, but I can understand why people enjoy it. But here's how you could have actually made Ahsoka work, and we're going to get back to the Mandalorian here now that we've had our side trail with Filoni and the backstory of how he's making this universe. The way you could have made Ahsoka work is you could have made it that all the Jedi Masters had one Padawan. impossible to have two, as Master Yoda said. And then Ahsoka's master is killed in the Clone Wars, and they're left with this conundrum. What do we do with this Padawan? And they're looking for, do they just let her go off on her own way? Well, they can't do that. They might risk creating a Sith out of that, or a gray Jedi, and they don't want to have another one of those. So they decide that they're going to put her under the tutelage of Obi-Wan. But Obi-Wan cannot always be around, so then she falls under Anakin's supervision. He is not a master. He is serving as a pseudo master in Obi-Wan's absence, and thus he can start to rub off on her, and thus she can start to change it and create this whole new order of gray Jedi that honestly is presented by George Lucas with Count Dooku. Count Dooku is technically in that category, I believe, as being a gray Jedi, and that's why they don't initially think that he is a Sith, and they don't seek to take him down. It isn't until he comes out and is like, yes, I am a Sith, that they suddenly realize, oh no, this has gotten way different than we expected. He was once a Jedi. He couldn't kill anybody, even if he wanted to. They didn't believe he was a Sith. So you could have actually had that storyline work. But what Filoni did, he wanted to keep the whole concept of Master and Jedi and didn't want to introduce a different lore aspect, and thus missed a great opportunity to make both camps happy. That's what frustrates me with Mandalorian, is that there's opportunities where they could have made both camps happy, but they don't.
See, I agree and disagree. It's hard to quite debate that point, but the way I view it is Ahsoka was kind of brought in a selfish way for Anakin as a way to almost commit him. The way I always viewed it is a way to commit him more to the Jedi Order, giving him more purpose. It's bigger than him. Like, his goal is to teach another person. And since he was already so talented and strong with the Force, I always viewed it as logical, even though he might not be the most sane person with the Force. He's still dealing with his own downfalls. I think the way they tackled it in the Clone Wars and Rebels and such was not that he created the gray Jedi. It was almost like she became wanted, like a criminal, like framed for murder in the Clone Wars, and her only resort was to leave the Jedi Order, because if she stayed there, then the government would have killed her for a crime she did not commit. And that was a very sad moment when she left the Jedi Order. And Anakin was very saddened by it. He wanted her to stay with the Jedi Order and become the Jedi she could be, even though the government was against her and trying to frame her for a crime she did not commit.
But that's why I look at these elements and think that I think that that's part of the disconnect, is that we have so many different approaches to Star Wars, and right now all of them have existed long enough. We have George Lucas's vision of Star Wars. We have Filoni's vision of Star Wars. We have Disney's version of Star Wars. All three of them now have an entirely different fan base. It is, and that's one of the reasons why it's so utterly confusing. People who are a part of the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy get confused by the other two. People who are fans of Clone Wars get confused, and the books, as I understand, I kind of put those into the same camp. They get confused by the other two, and the Disney fans get confused by everyone else. So we have three different camps of people, and now the challenge is trying to figure out how to start to fuse it back together, because right now it's split apart for far too long, and Mandalorian is kind of like a glue that is bringing everybody back. If nothing else, just raising the questions and saying, hey, we can actually see how all these elements can fit together. I don't think it's being done very well, but how they can fit together in such a way that you can reunify the fan base. In that sense, I think they're actually doing a good job.
Yeah, and I was just commenting about how you kind of said Anakin played the part of her becoming this gray Jedi when he didn't want that for her. It's still, in my opinion, the original intention that the reason he became a Sith was because of Padme and these dreams he was having of her dying, and he was trying to do whatever he could to save her. I don't think Ahsoka really played any part in his downfall to becoming a Sith. It's still Padme and him wanting to protect her any way possible, even if that means he strays away from what he should be or could be. Like the way they portray in the show is Anakin really wanted the best for Ahsoka as a Jedi, and when the government pretty much framed her for a crime she did not commit, which could happen if you like if you view Star Wars outside the way it's portrayed, like a Jedi could be committed of a crime that they did not commit, and the way that in her ending when she leaves, Anakin is so saddened by it. Like he does not want this for her. He's trying to fight the government and she proved that she's innocent of these crimes they're accusing her of. Like, but it also deepens his character because he's doing this because he cares about her, and you shouldn't feel feelings as a Jedi, and the reason he's doing this is because he truly loves Ahsoka, and I think it deepens his character in a way because he's giving into such feelings. Whereas if he was a normal Jedi, I feel like he would just be like, huh, he must have committed these crimes. This is what the people are saying that needs to be done, people ahead of me, and this is what I need to do.
So,
but with him,
we're not going to spend too much more time on Ahsoka, but there is one last thing I want to bring up, and that's something you mentioned about Anakin, because this is a huge part. And by the way, we're actually going to come back to Ahsoka one day, because that is actually a big subject, and we're getting a bit off track. But the last thing I want to mention is Anakin, ever since he was first introduced to the story, is selfish. And the reason why I think many people got frustrated with the films and why they started leaning towards Dave Filoni's kind of vision is because people didn't understand what Lucas was trying to go for. Anakin is actually, like, he epitomizes everything about somebody who's losing his way, someone who's arrogant and full of pride, has it all, and views everything with a very selfish ambition. And so when they saw it on film, they didn't realize that's actually how people act when they're in that sort of situation. The actor got so humiliated by, honestly, the first real wave of fan hate that I've heard of, and it destroyed his character in the sense of that people mocked it as like bad overacting, things like that. And then I literally met somebody who was like this, and it changed my whole perspective on it. And suddenly it made so much sense why George Lucas had the approach that he did. And so thus Filoni changes that direction. But again, now we have 3 camps, and now we come back to Mandalorian. Introduces all those 3 camps and tries to merge them together. And in that sense, Disney very much is hoping that this works out. But at the same time, every time they introduce an element into Mandalorian, it feels like it is a Band-Aid. It's not actually designed to really hold things together in the way that it really needs to. When they do things like they introduce Luke Skywalker, they introduce Ahsoka, Boba Fett, the mechanics, all these different elements are designed to actually build upon other stories that they have. It's not designed to really build upon the Mandalorian story. The only one that's designed to do that is Din Djarin's overall story arc of that he's trying to become basically redeemed, and be able to get back into the Mandalorian order. The whole season, well, past seasons and this season very much feel like it's full of cameos. And I wish very much so that they would actually take these different elements and flesh them out by making, maybe by like cutting the amount of things they add in half. And that way, maybe all these different elements will stick together a little bit better. I think that might actually be very helpful for them in helping to make the story feel more connected and impactful. Right here, we have they don't have the connections. They have the connections, but yet they don't spend a lot of time on any connections to the films, to the series, to the books, to the games. Everything is all about those cameos.
The cameos are one thing, but when you use Bo-Katan and you're not progressing your character, especially fans of the Clone Wars like me or Rebels, where that's where you really start to see her character change from what we saw in Clone Wars to where she is now. In Rebels, you saw her character change from the downfall of Mandalore, but now she's just so stagnant. She's been the same character we've seen since season 1 or 2 when she was introduced. Like, I'm fine with them bringing these characters in that we all know and love, because I truly do believe that their paths could cross within the story. It's just that they're not adding anything to it, or the characters aren't progressing in a way. They're just there just because everyone knows and loves them. Like, if these characters didn't already know them, they would have no meaning in the story. Like, if Bo-Katan was just any other Mandalorian, people would be like, okay, why should I care about this character? But if they could find some way to progress her character in the way she's interacting with the future generations of Mandalore and dealing with her past of the collapse of Mandalore and the death of her sister from Darth Maul, there could be some very interesting things. But it's just Bo-Katan, she hasn't done much since she's been introduced to the show, and I really hope this season changes that.
So interesting that you mentioned that. There was kind of a similar sort of feeling, you could say, with films for those of us that were watching the films and when we saw the Clone Wars. And so there is kind of a similarity right now in how Disney is approaching now the Clone Wars. And this is part about the third camp. So we already have addressed the first 2 camps that are there, but now Disney is definitely approaching us in a completely different way. And so the Clone Wars is being impacted in a similar way as the Clone Wars impacted the original story. And so I would be curious to see if they actually lean back to the Clone Wars. I mean, Favreau is involved, and so I would be surprised if he doesn't try and pull that thread forward. But he also might have his hands tied. I don't know. Since he is involved, I guess that I would believe that he wouldn't want to change his original vision too much.
Filoni.
Sorry, Favreau.
Filoni.
Oh, am I getting this too mixed up? My apologies, everyone. That's a problem when you have people with somewhat similar names that I myself get confused all the time.
It's not a big deal.
All right, Favreau. Wait a minute. Jon Favreau, that's the one that wrote the story.
No, this is Dave Filoni who did the Clone Wars and Ahsoka and everything. Favreau did Iron Man.
Oh, that's right. So he has come in and he has started to change it, but if I remember right, Filoni was the one that was like helping out with this story initially. Is that correct?
Favreau is really that Band-Aid that you're kind of speaking of. He's really the person who's just trying to unite everyone. Filoni, he definitely had his own vision for Star Wars. And I agree with some of the stuff he did. Whatever, that's neither here or there. But, Filoni was the person who was kind of like the Padawan to George Filoni, who kind of strayed away and did his own thing.
Okay. That's why I'm getting confused. It's like when people get confused with Bob Iger and Bob Eisner. I heard somebody getting confused with that as well. So right now I'm in that same camp. As
Ugly.
I'm getting those two guys mixed up because they're too similar for me to keep distinct. But anyway, that they are
Should
definitely.
we get into Mandalorian now?
Sorry? Yes, we are technically
Should we get into that now?
Yes, so we are technically already in that. Right here we have next some of these different elements, and we're going to bring up the scenes here. So we're actually going to dive into the scenes. I was doing the last little bit there in terms of where they're going with the story, how it was actually connected together.
Okay.
But in the Mandalorian, we are first introduced to this idea of the Forge. The Forge is something I'm glad that they introduced. I think that it could have been done a little differently, because this is an incredibly inefficient Forge. Incredibly inefficient. But if they had like multiple smiths all working at the same time, that would have given kind of some justification to the way that they built it. But I do like that they showed the creation of helmets and showing why the armor is such a big part of their culture. And the whole time I was thinking, who is this armor being made for? And then I realized that, it's being made for a kid. But then when they came out, I first thought that it was being given to Din. I thought for a moment that was Din Djarin. And then it wasn't.
I thought it was Grogu.
He would have one heck of a head if it was that big. But I thought the moment we saw the kid, I thought that was Din the moment we saw the kid. And because his hair is somewhat similar, and I thought, this is a flashback. And then we learned that it's not. And so we're not going to dive too much into all the different aspects of the story, because I don't want to spoil it for everybody on some of the plot lines that take place. We've already spoiled enough. But the connection to it does feel like it was a missed opportunity. I feel like they could have maybe approached it. Well, I guess, come to think of it, we kind of are already going to destroy it. So if you are, this is a bit of a spoiler. We are a week delayed, so if you've not seen it already, my apologies, everyone. We should have put that in the title. I'll put it in the title for next time. But this was a missed opportunity. It should have been a flashback, or it should have been something else entirely. And we're going to actually go over what I think it should have been at the very end here. Right here, though, when they're giving it to him, we are suddenly introduced to this giant monster.
It's a girl. I think that's a girl.
No, that has a... Okay, well, just regardless, we're introduced to this creature.
I thought the same thing.
No, it's a boy. The way his voice is a boy. Yep. But we are introduced to this creature that comes out of the water. It feels very disconnected. It's like, what is this creature's presence supposed to do? And while it adds interest, it adds action to the story, it also introduces something a little goofy. It wastes Mandalorians. And it's like, wow, these Mandalorians are pretty weak. Their armor's garbage, apparently. And which is unfortunate, because they kept stressing about how strong their armor is and how it can take blaster fire and whatnot, but it cannot withstand a creature like this, and their weapons are a bit weak. Which is unfortunate. It's like, okay, you're along the river or ocean or whatever this is, and you were not anticipating that this creature is going to arise. So it's some kitsch action. Movies or films will put stuff in like that because, going back to what Disney is doing, they're writing by formula. And by formula, you have to keep the audience engaged with action every couple of minutes. And they actually have this equation figured out so that they will literally cut off people's sentences so they could add in this action. And that's exactly what happens in this story. And then we get to see someone come and save the day. And that is the Mandalorian. Din Djarin, flying his modified Naboo starfighter, which, by the way, I still think is one of the best starfighters that Star Wars has ever made. Very well done.
I agree.
But the logistics behind his modifications are not quite there, although it does make for a very neat looking craft. It just is not, well, it's not really designed all that well in terms to just understanding how machines work, especially in the world of Star Wars. And then, of course, we have the little pod where Grogu sits as well. A very unfortunate...
Which they get rid of.
Sorry?
They get rid of it for some reason, which makes Boba Fett even more meaningless. They get rid of that spot for the Grogu for a droid. It's like, all right, then why even introduce it in Boba Fett?
Mm-hmm. Precisely.
It's just like, what the heck?
So we have then a introduction of why Din Djarin has returned, and his reasons for returning are unique in terms of that, again, for someone who looks at the Mandalorian lore from a film aspect, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't know what it's like for the Clone Wars background, but to have this idea that Mandalore is off limits, poisoned, and no one has ever ventured back there before sounded very peculiar. And so for them to have this shard that they present, the Gorian shard, where is it? We're not able to see it. I cannot clip properly there. There we go. Right down there, the Gorian shard. I have no idea why they call it Gorian. They didn't introduce that aspect. And they did not introduce it well enough that if they did show this in past seasons, I have no recollection of it. Because it was kind of, it didn't leave enough of an impact. And so I felt like its introduction was weak. And while it does have some very interesting visuals, I do like the visuals of it. And I do like the ramifications of why it looks the way it does. But then they say, well, is Mandalore still poisoned? And that's a pretty easy thing for them to find out. Very easy thing. I mean, Din Djarin's flying all over the galaxy. Never once thought about stopping by Mandalore and maybe throw a probe down there to find out if it's poisoned or not. Very unique.
Yeah, you think they'd be going on expeditions.
Yeah.
You think they'd be going on expeditions to get back to their home planet.
Especially when they make such a big emphasis on that, how important their planet is to them. Which, again, that's another subject for later on, but kind of an odd thing for them to have. And then he decides that he's going to venture off-world in order to go find someone to help him explore Mandalore. And so he goes back, and we see a lot of great Easter eggs. Oh golly, I forgot what the name of the planet is that he flies to. Navarro, that's right. Navarro. He flies back to Navarro, and it is a very interesting planet. I like what they did with it. They put a lot of effort into its creation, and they had a lot of great Easter eggs. Okay, where's some of those Easter eggs? Zoom back. It does not like clipping forward. It clips forward several seconds. Slowly. Oh, this character. That protocol droid. That is one of the weirdest things to add in. They have a protocol droid that's basically giving advertisements. It's like,
can I speak on the beginning scene?
Oh yes, feel free.
So the beginning scene wasn't perfect, but I really liked it. I liked seeing how they introduced the younger generation, because they're obviously trying to expand and bring new blood into this creed that they have created to try and bring back their people, which is a fallen species from what it once was. And I really liked seeing how they were kind of. It was like an induction ceremony, bring people into it, which was cool. And then I agree that the alligator that came out of the water, it just wasn't great. Like I was always wondering to myself while watching it, I was like, why didn't they just fly up on one of those ridges and just shoot missiles at it from above? Or like anything. Like why were they staying on the beach near where this thing was? Like these people were idiots. They should have just grabbed the younger generation, which is the one good thing about the scene is the older generation was protecting the younger generation of this creed, which was good to see. You know, you this one kid he wanted to go out and fight this alligator because obviously he's ambitious and wants to protect this creed that he was just inducted into. And then the older generation is like, no, like you're going to be here for longer. Like just survive and continue this thing on type of thing. And I was always just wondering myself, like, why didn't they get the young kids out of there, fly them into the cave, or fly them up on top of the mountain that was behind them, and then just shoot missiles at it while they were flying?
Mm-hmm.
But the plus side of what they did with it is, compared to Boba Fett, the CGI from a technical standpoint for the jetpack flying is so like 1,000 years better than what they did in Boba Fett. In Boba Fett, the CGI for the jetpack flying was not good at all. In this show, like it was actually immersive. It was cool to see it. It was just I don't like the way they were like. I think they could. The writers could have made the people who literally have jetpacks on their back use it better, which has been a common complaint in the Mandalorian show.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like how the armor confronted him about how he took his helmet off, because that was just something that was a huge part of the end of season 2. They obviously came around with an easy way to get around that plot point of not being able to take your helmet off, where you just have to go bathe in waters. But I think it takes a very, in our terms, I think it takes a very religious approach, almost like a born again Christian, like someone who strayed away from their religion, and they obviously had sinned, and they want to repent for their sins and be born again within this creed, or in our terms, a religion, which is Christian. And I think the whole in the next episode going to the waters is almost like being baptized and being reborn again within this faith. I think it's a very interesting approach, although I wish it was harder for him to get back into the creed. I think they are taking very, very much inspiration from, honestly, the religion in our world, where you can kind of just be baptized and born again and repent for your sins, and which for him was taking off his helmet and showing his face to his creed. In our world, it'd be the many sins you can commit.
And actually,
So
I
I wasn't really happy.
want to raise actually a question, a point about that at the very end, about the Mandalorian creed. So that's a good thing you mentioned, but we're going to actually cover that at the very end.
All right, let's continue.
So right now we have, so to go back to Navarro. Oh, there, I just saw them. Oh, come on. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? There. It was great to see these creatures introduced again into the story.
Friends?
The Zort lookalikes. Bastion says, I think the Mandalore not being able to visit their home planet is because it was so devastated and cursed that it would be foolish to explore it. But the second episode, just him on the plane. Okay. We will get to
Well,
the
it's just
second
destroyed
one
from the
in a
Empire.
little while.
Yeah, well, it's just destroyed from the Empire, which has been expanded upon in other content of Star Wars. And obviously, if your planet gets destroyed to the point where the Death Star is attacking you and you can't even recognize where you are, there's just remnants of a passive society. Um, like obviously, there's going to be some suspicion and stuff that comes along with it going back there to this, like you're obviously going to go back at some point, which is what we're seeing right now. But there's going to be some people who are like they're just very cautious, really cautious about the whole thing. And I really like the way they're attacking it. It's not just something easy where they can just be like, you know what, our society collapsed. Now let's go back. It's something where there's people who are cautious about the whole thing. And should we really do this? Why are we doing this? And because I think that's very realistic. There'd be two sides to the whole thing almost, where people are like, let's go back, and there's people who are like, no, like this is where our society literally collapsed, and we're the only survivors left. It's a very interesting approach to the thing, and it could be good, and it could be just where they leave it on a very dull note with Disney and Star Wars. It's just gonna be something that we see as the story progresses. But let's continue.
So this whole planet of Navarro has Easter eggs galore that I believe most of them are probably going to end up in Galaxy's Edge sometime in the near future, which honestly is a good idea for them. I can actually see them wanting to put a statue of the assassin droid out there.
Definitely.
I could imagine them wanting to have some of the products for sale, having the Zort lookalikes up in the trees. Having things like that is actually a really good strategy for them to try and implement into this world. And they made it a trading post, which Galaxy's Edge will probably start to look like more and more in the future. Or maybe they're doing this so people get interested in Galaxy's Edge. But then something goofy happens. And this part really baffled me. We get to we get to this point of where Din's asking that he needs help, and he's rejecting this opportunity to restart his life here on this planet. And he's interrupted so they can go back out into the square in order to get them some extra airtime, by the way. And they're introduced to space pirates, which, by the way, is a very legitimate thing, and honestly something I wish Star Wars would have done more with to this point. But the way that they introduced these characters was very silly. Very silly. Mm-hmm. Because of what causes the aggravation between these characters. You have a character that wants to come and drink at a bar, which has been turned into a school, and their argument is whether or not it's still a bar. It is the most ridiculous sort of argument, because it's like, well, obviously there's no drinks in there. You want to go to a bar, there's another bar down here. Why are you so obsessed with this? It's
a block away. Just walk down a block.
Yeah, the point is that it's something that is called it's like they're trying to call in fake tension, because they don't want to have real tension. Otherwise, that would actually be a turnoff for a family show. And Disney is trying to toe a very fine line. They don't know how to do this. They've never technically known how to do this. They have tried and kind of stumbled along into success at times, and most of the time I think it's kind of a failure. Because what ends up happening is they decide that because this guy wants to have a drink, he's going to just pull out his gun and shoot people. Because why? Because Pirates of the Caribbean has colored our understanding of pirates, and space pirates obviously must be wanting to be Caribbean. Obviously they want to be trying to represent a Pirates of the Caribbean look. And that's What makes the scene
I
so
disagree.
silly?
That there's nothing similar between the two. There's nothing similar between the two.
What I mean
But
is that they're trying
I
to get a
agree.
drink.
I,
Like they're trying to play off of why is the rum gone sort of joke, and that they're going to whip out
I
their
I
weapons
agree.
at any chance. That's the reason why I find it a bit
But
goofy.
in Pirates of the Caribbean, it was. I think that story is much more. It's not Lord of the Rings type thought out, but it's much more thought out than what this was. Where they just need a reason for two people to have a conflict, and this is literally the introduction for Gorian Shard and his pirates. Um, that literally, I think Gorian Shard and his fellow pirates, I think they're gonna be kind of the main villain for this season, and this is just their introduction, even though it was lackluster and not the most interesting thing. Um, but there is some pluses to it because I like how they did acknowledge that Magistrate Karga, who's Carl Weathers is awesome. You know, he's a great actor. Uh, been in Rocky and everything. Uh, it was their way of just kind of introducing. They acknowledged that he had to do some terrible things to get this city and this trade post built to what it is now. And I really liked how when they're walking through the city, you could see scaffolding in the background and seeing the city still being built. It's not its full potential yet. But at the top, one person had to kind of do terrible things to get it to the point it was now. And I think Magistrate Karga, who's Carl Weathers, I think he's a very interesting character in the story. I think he's kind of the voice of some fans. You know, he acknowledges, like I need a marshal, was Cara Dune, Gina Carano, who was fired, and he was the voice of acknowledging her disappearance. And in that same scene, literally a line later, they acknowledged, well, what happened to, he said, what happened to Moff Gideon? And it was, well, the Empire just shipped him off to another distant part of the galaxy. And I think he's not the greatest character ever in Star Wars, but he plays a crucial part in taking this step in the Mandalorian story in a good direction. And I really liked how they handled Cara Dune and Gina Carano. It was tasteful, and they didn't bash just because Gina Carano is who she is and the view she has. They didn't bash her character that she played. They literally included her in the same scene. They were like, Gina Carano or Cara Dune is, since she arrested Moff Gideon, she got a promotion. And then the same scene, literally a sentence later, they're like, Moff Gideon got moved to pretty much a block down the road type of thing. And it was a very, like, they could have just been like, yeah, she's gone, she's dead type of thing. They could have just gotten rid of her character. But they literally included Gina Carano's Cara Dune in this scene where we're literally learning about the future of the villain within the first two seasons. And I'm very happy with the way they dealt with it, even though she's not there anymore. I still have hope that Disney's just be like, screw it, we're gonna bring her back. You know, let's just bring her back. I think I think she will get her own show within 3 years.
See, I don't know if that would actually
Yeah.
necessarily help her character, though. But that's.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, you mentioned about Carl Weathers. Carl Weathers, his character is good. I don't. Unfortunately, his acting though is a bit overdramatic. But then everyone's acting in this show is overdramatic, and that comes down to production value. how many takes you're going to do. Are you going to take the best takes, or are you going to put together the ones where they're basically doing the trial runs? And I feel like they grabbed the wrong takes of all these characters. And especially when it came down to the pirates.
Yeah, or just poor directing.
Which it didn't feel like it connected very well with these characters, with their backstory. Their personalities felt like they were being driven by the need for this formula to have conflict. But it is true that he definitely introduced a very graceful way for Gina Carano's character to be removed. And back in the day, back before in the day before we actually had the ability to know kind of like all the ins and outs of what was happening in Hollywood, this would have happened behind the scenes, and we would have seen it in the show and thought that it was very logical. And so in that sense, what Disney did was tasteful in the sense of that it didn't spark a conflict. It gave basically a respectful career for Gina Carano to go into, but it didn't necessarily say we're going to address the issue moving forward. And he definitely, Carl Weathers definitely did present some of that much needed weight to help solidify that change. Back to the scene. Back to the scene.
I want to say one more thing. And it's not just his question of that one thing. He literally said, he kind of acknowledged what happened in Boba Fett. He was like, "Why are you still with Grogu?" He said, "I thought your mission was over. Your mission was to get Grogu to the Jedi, and you were going to be done. Like, you were going to go back on your own path. He was going to go on his own path." And Mando was like, "It's more complicated than that." And there was one other thing. Hold on. Well, so yeah, and he was pretty much just, there was very many things where it was just like and there's one other small thing compared to the other thing, where he called Grogu a kid. He was like, "Why are you still hanging out with this kid?" And it was in that kind of same thing where he's like, "I thought your mission was done. Your mission was to get Grogu to the Jedi, and you were going to be done and moving on." And Mando was like, "His name is Grogu," and Magistrate Karga, Carl Weathers, was like, "All right, whatever." His name is he's Baby Yoda. Like, I don't know. He just seems like very much a voice of the fans within the Star Wars universe. Like, any questions that you could have as a fan watching the show, he kind of answers those questions. And I don't know, I kind of, his character, it seems very simple, and he's just kind of in the background, shows up whenever, but I think he answers from some very important questions for fans that you might not even realize.
We're gonna need to move on though. It's going on for quite a while. So anyway, as I was saying about the pirates are very much an element where Disney is trying to play off of fans and trying to get in a new fan base, because it's not just that the fans are seeing pirates from Disney's the animated series of Star Wars, but we're also introduced to a character who is an incredibly odd addition to anyone who is knowledgeable of Star Wars lore. We're introduced to a Davy Jones wannabe. It is incredibly strange that Gorian Shard is introduced here, because I don't know his backstory, but the way they present him is obviously designed to look like a Disney pirate. Definitely. And it's it was not a good presentation. It could have been so much better. I would have preferred if they would have stuck with these characters than introduce a character that literally is a ripoff of Davy Jones. Which is unfortunate because I think that that's going to set up for some problems down the road in terms of their world building, because it's taking advantage of other Disney properties to really build up their lore. But before we leave Navarro, I want to mention the Assassin Droid. The Assassin Droid has a very interesting aspect to it in that for some reason, Din needs the Assassin Droid. And his reasonings don't necessarily make sense. Sure, it has some importance, but compared to what he needs, it's like, yeah, why not just get another droid? He is very much stressing he needs this droid in particular, which is nothing. Which honestly is nothing more than going back. Just saying, rolling chairs. It's nothing more than going back to a previous series in order to do a callback, which is very much how a lot of these Disney series are kind of approaching things. I like the character. I think it's a good addition, but I think how they implement it into the story is lacking some lore building.
Well, his character in the first season or two was very anti-droids because they killed his parents. Droids killed his parents. The Empire early on was using droids as still, and because Palpatine was using droids during the Clone Wars, and his parents was literally killed by droids in front of his eyes. So he didn't trust them. Like, why would he trust something that was programmed by someone he doesn't even know, type of thing? And this droid literally gave his life for him and Grogu in this lava pit, this lava stream. And I understand why he wouldn't want another droid to be a part of his life, and why he's very trusting of this droid who literally gave his life for him and Grogu. But in Boba Fett, we kind of saw this progression of him. He was literally working on his ship that he has now to build, like, him and this droid pretty much built this ship. And it was a BD unit, BD-27, I think it was. Which is one of my favorite droids in Star Wars from the Jedi Fallen Order. I think it was one of those first introduced. We see this introduction of him kind of opening more accepting of droids, where he used to just kind of be like, no, screw all droids, they're just programmed to do evil things. And now he's like, okay, it's not always like that. But
at the same time, though, there's so many better ways that they could have actually approached that. And the fact that they are stressing that this is the one that I need to have, especially when it reverts back to killer instincts, is definitely an interesting approach. And I see Jess agrees with you in that sense, saying Mando is set up as a character who doesn't trust droids at all, even to work on his ships. That is very true. He very much is set up like that. But at the same time, when he's going to go exploring another planet, when he's going to go back and explore Mandalore, they need to reintroduce that, especially like build up that aspect of where you can see that he will not go with any other droid for that very reason.
Well, wasn't that his whole purpose of being like, I need this droid? Like in the other... Because we're separated by a season. What? Just go get another droid.
We're separated by over a season. Yeah, but the droid Smiths were like, go get another droid.
Yeah, but the droid Smiths were like, go get another droid. And he was like, no, I need this one.
We're not interested. But here's the thing. We need to know, as a writer, they need to be able to reintroduce those elements before they present them again to the audience, because his character has had time to change. character has changed over 2 seasons, Mandalorian season 2 and Book of Fett. His character has had 2 seasons to change, so thus he shouldn't technically still have some of these prejudices in that sense. If
his
he still has
family's killed by droids.
But you're also forgetting he has had a lot of character change. And so the fact that he's had the character change, you have to reintroduce why he's reverting back to that, especially since we're disconnected from so many seasons in that sense. Because I understand why you're saying that, but I'm saying as a writer, Disney could have improved upon that, because it doesn't actually make sense in terms of their writing technique. Because at first it's like, oh, maybe the droid actually has some sort of information that he needs to get. If it's nothing more than companionship, that enters a whole different reason and why he needs to approach it, in that sense of reestablishing that he only trusts this droid because it's the only droid that he could trust.
Thing in the first. Well, that was a huge thing in the first season of Mandalorian. He could have had this shift type thing, take him across these plains to get him to his bounty, where he inevitably found Grogu. Instead, he rode this animal. He was like, no, screw these droids, because I understand that they're programmed to do whatever the programmer says. He was like, I just want to ride this animal that I have control over. And then in season 2, when that thing died for him, he realized that, oh wow, maybe I was wrong. And I completely understand not just being like, all of a sudden that's just the switching moment of, okay, I need to be understanding of all droids type thing. He's still cautious. Like, this one droid is the one that he had a connection with that saved his life. So I can completely understand him being not just accepting of all droids just because this particular droid was just like, all right, I'm gonna give my life for you. But speaking of this droid, that droid, once it got rebooted, that malfunction where it just started going off and trying to kill Grogu, that was very interesting in my opinion. Seeing how far, seeing really the effects of the programming of the droids, because when he was fully functionable as a droid, he was protecting and literally did whatever he could to protect Grogu. Literally just giving his life as a droid. But once he got rebooted, that past programming, it was just outdoor. Like, it wasn't in him anymore. So he's like, I need to kill this Grogu.
And in that sense, that should have actually been a switch for Mando to say that, no, I'm not going to trust this droid ever again. That should have been a triggering moment. That's where a flashback should have happened. Because even though it sacrificed itself for him, if we're to believe that there's no other droid he would trust, that needs to trigger him. And so that where he decides that he's not going to go with that droid ever again, because it betrayed him. It sacrificed itself for him, but now it only wants to kill. And so that should, again, trigger his reflexes, if we're to believe that this really does impact the reason why he wants this droid over any other one.
Well, he realized in season 2 that droids just do what they're programmed to. So it's more of a distrusting of the programmers in a way. The people who are the droid smiths.
But literally, this is like cause and effect. If he's choosing this droid over any other one, that's because he believes this droid offers something that no other droid can. But when it betrays him, that should go back to his prejudice, why he won't go with any droid at all. That should be a reason why he maybe seeks out a Mandalorian to help him, rather than this droid. Because I understand what you're saying. Yes, it sacrificed itself for him, but it also betrays him. And so thus, if we're to believe that this is the only droid that he can trust, only droid he can invest in, then we need to see something that causes him to not revert back to the old Mando of distrusting all droids.
I view that distrust as him being like, okay, this is just the way that his original programmers programmed him,
So why not go with
not
a
the
droid that
droid
has different
itself.
programming, a protocol droid that has better programming? Like
Well,
literally,
that's what he did.
this.
He tried to go and get it reprogrammed. He tried to go and get it reprogrammed. That was the whole thing of that episode. He was like, let's get this rebuilt. Let's get it back to the way I remember it, and let's get it programmed to the way I remember it type thing. He's like, I'll go get the parts for it.
But again, that breaks the actual story in that sense, because there's no reason to go with this droid if he truly does believe you can reprogram a droid. Then obviously he should go with a droid with better programming, because then that means that he's actually grown up. But he hasn't grown past it. So
Yeah, but the
thus,
distrust is between the humans, not the robot itself. And I feel like that was the big thing.
all right, well that
And
will have to
he
be
doesn't know the programmer by himself.
yeah, well, that will have
We
to
can
be
move on then.
an area that we disagree with, because there are definitely
Yeah.
different approaches to that. But again, that comes down to that we have different sort of views of some of these characters, because in the end, we have a very different starting place. When we have the difference of the movies versus the shows, things like this completely derail kind of what Disney's
Well, I've seen
doing.
all the movies.
But the question is, which one do you put more weight behind? Which one? Because right now we do have three. We have three
and then the
camps.
prequel. I hate the sequels. I hate the sequels.
Yeah,
I
but
hate
what
the
I'm
sequels.
what I'm saying,
I'm not
what I'm
Disney,
saying,
though, but
yeah,
I'm,
what I'm saying is that right now there are three camps.
I'm in
Kind of like what I started. Kind of like
Yeah,
what I
I'm in
started
two.
this off with.
I'm two.
There's, yeah. So we have the movies, we have the TV series and the books, and then we have the Disney stuff. And Mandalorian's trying to address all three of those. And right now there
Definitely.
is such passion in different camps, but that's because these passions are built up because honestly, we grew up with them. Right now we have a whole different generation that has for 10 years been in Disney's camp. And so now we have complete and total divide. I cannot stand a lot of the aspects that have happened in the other two camps. But again, after seeing this stuff for long enough, I can understand where it's coming from, the reason why these things have been introduced. But when speaking from a writer's point of view, there's a lot of moments like things like in things like this, which are changing all camps for the Disney camp. And so
Yeah.
thus it doesn't share the connection to either of those ones, and it's creating a whole different one. I can still understand why Disney is doing that, but I wish that they would actually write with the intention of trying to keep consistency. Then
Yeah.
you can look at it
Well-
in its own sphere and realize, hey, you know, we have something completely different, and then start to appreciate it for what it represents. And this character is actually a good example of how we have now three different camps, three different views of this. Each of them has its pros, each of them has its cons. But in the end,
Yeah, well,
this is the approach Disney chose to take.
Yeah, well, in Mandalorian, we see this droid give his life for him and Grogu, which was the ultimate turning point of his view of droids.
Right, but we've already gone
and
over
then-
that aspect right there. So
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
going to move on
I was
to the
kinda
next
going
one
on, I was
here.
kinda going- Wait, and then in Boba Fett, he trusts this droid to build his ship, and that's where you truly start to see him bonding with other droids. You know, just being like, okay, this is not something I have to be worried about, that every droid out there in the world is just going to be out to kill me or my family, or Grogu in this case. And, okay, let's just move on.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot more I would like, honestly, to say on the matter. Some things that I'll probably bring up at a later date.
We could go
because,
for an hour. On this topic.
because
We could go for an hour on
this-
this topic.
because honestly, there's actually something else, like right with this scene right here. Because I'm not addressing the droid. I'm addressing these characters again. Because these characters are genius, in my opinion. I very much like these characters. They are a perfect addition to Star Wars, but like with other aspects of writing, they are introduced in the wrong way to the wrong audience. This should have been introduced a long time ago. They should have been introduced in The Force Awakens. That's how far back they should have been introduced, because they were going to make an appearance in the third episode of the sequel trilogy, and they're going to make an appearance here. Disney didn't have that far-reaching of a vision for this. It's very much make an episode,
I agree,
make it for the time being, and don't actually think about the ramifications of those decisions. Missed opportunity, but I do like the characters as a whole. I used to dislike them, but now that I've had a chance to see them in their element, they make more sense, and now I actually can appreciate their introduction into the Star Wars world. Mando then decides that he's going to go off and try and get extra help, and this is where we have that scene with Gorian Shard and the space pirates. Very, honestly, a good space fight. We got to see the mines that are out there on the asteroids that were mentioned about. Very good introduction to the lore. But then something silly. He sees the pirate ship, and then he has to kind of jet past him, and we're left thinking, okay, there's going to be a ramification for this. We don't know what it is, but there's going to be consequences for his encounter, for his attack. I hope they pull that thread forward, because it could be interesting. And then we end off with... Sorry, say your thought and we'll finish off.
I agree. This whole pirate space battle thing could have been much better. The whole time I was wondering to myself, why doesn't he just hyperspace away? Like, he's outnumbered. It's just him and this person, alien Grogu, that he's trying to protect. Why is he staying there? Why is he putting this person that he's putting in protection at risk? And obviously it was because the only reason he was staying there was to introduce Gorian Shard. That was the only reason that he stayed there. And that's why they tried to make it seem so cool. You know, he's like, okay, Mando, he's gonna knock off some pirates, it's gonna look cool, and then we're gonna be introduced to his character. And Gorian Shard and his pirates, they're definitely gonna show up for at least later this season or the next season. They're trying to take the Hondo and Naka approach to it, in my opinion, which is very similar to Clone Wars. And with Filoni being involved in this, I can understand that, because he created Hondo and Naka. He's a very popular character, very popular pirate. They're obviously going to try and build this character up within this part of the timeline. But the whole time, it just made Mando seem like an idiot. I was like, why doesn't he just hyperspace away? Like, that was what I was saying to myself the whole time he was fighting these people. I was like, just fly out of this asteroid field and hyperspace away. Like, you have no reason to fight these people. And then we get introduced to Gorian Shard, and it was obvious, okay, this is the whole reason he was staying there. Because we need to understand who his character is, because he's going to show up later in the season. Gorian Shard, I guarantee him and his pirates are a crucial part of the later parts of the season.
I hope so, because I have been disappointed a couple of times by this season, by past seasons, of being introduced to something and then not actually following through. We then get to see a Mandalorian castle. This was a very goofy moment, because this castle is incredibly bland. Incredibly bland. Compared to past Star Wars worlds, this has no culture, no history. Because, look at this. It's on... So, understanding what a castle is very important. A castle is a defensive structure that's designed to actually protect a realm at a crucial junction, usually at a trade route, usually along a strategic location where armies would march along, overlooking a town. It needs to be in a good position. This Mandalorian castle has no relevance to location. It doesn't have any sort of big guns nearby, no shield, so why do they have a castle out in the middle of nowhere? This is a monastery. This isn't a castle. And when we arrive, we're kind of reminded, because there's no... The architecture does not look like it's designed to protect. It doesn't look like it's designed for culture. It's just concrete slabs. I really disliked this scene, just based upon the fact that it doesn't understand what this region's supposed to be. I don't know if this has any sort of correlation to some sort of past artwork that has been done, but this does not inspire any sort of actual world building. This looks more like it belongs in a Halo world where you have the dead rings and this bunch of pointless buildings all around. This is the same sort of feel. And I wish that they would have taken the approach of the Naboo palaces, Coruscant, or Jabba the Hutt, or somewhere in between. They needed something to show culture, not just flags, not just concrete slabs. They needed to have some sort of etching around there. You need to see more people. You need to see relevance to this structure being around. And we don't get any of that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm even a fan of Clone Wars and Rebels. And we see this castle in Rebels. It's ruled by her mother, if I remember correctly. And there's a battle there, literally, for the Darksaber that takes place, which is what Mando has right now. And even then, I was really just, when Mando just walked into this place, it seemed so empty. Like, it literally seemed like Bo-Katan was the only person there, which I think they were trying to portray because all of her fellow Mandalorians abandoned her after she failed to get the Darksaber. But I was just sitting there thinking to myself, I was like, why is she sitting on the throne? Like, what purpose? Usually when you sit on the throne, I feel like it's to enact power. You know, be like, this is what we're doing as a realm right now. This is what's going to happen on this plot of land. But she was just sitting there, like, just chilling. I was just like, what is going on right now? And her introduction in this season was just very weak. And I have some complaints about her character for the next episode, which we'll go into this next podcast.
Right.
Discussion.
So, right here is the only bit of lore that we see to this castle. We have windows. We have a relief carving. This is the only bit of information we have about this location. And look, there's a jar off in the corner. Why? Because castles obviously have jars just scattered around. In a sci-fi world, no. This castle was designed with the idea of that they wanted a very cheap model. They probably were running out of time and said, let's just quickly put together something. But this is the beauty of digital, is that you have the ability to just throw out a lot of objects. They could have done that, and they didn't. And I think it's because they lacked the innovation to actually pull off this scene. They needed some sort of reference, and they couldn't figure out something. Couldn't figure out something out that really felt unique and special. And so this whole scene just feels dead. And one could argue that this was by design, but at the same time, there's other ways you could have done that. You could have shown that the whole place is falling apart. You could have seen that the whole place is is in disrepair, and Again, something to actually show that this place was once used, not to have it all like pristine and dusted and completely void of life. That doesn't make sense. It should have been covered in grime. It should have been. It's by the sea. You should have literally had like discoloration over the stones and any manner of thing, and you don't see any of that. And then we have this moment where Din says, I came here to basically ask you to help me go back to Mandalore, which again is very easy to pull off. And I don't know why they keep making such a big to-do about this, but this is very much a sticking point. And the fact that they have to keep bringing this up over and over throughout this episode goes to show that they actually didn't have enough content to run with. They repeat the same request for help in different ways to different characters throughout this entire episode. And that's the last point I want to make. This episode has 1, 2, 3 locations that takes place in which Mando says 3 different ways that he's going back to Mandalore and he needs help. And 3 times he's basically told, no, you're on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And then he walks off. You could have had that same message done at just one of the locations, and it would have been enough to carry on the information. You could have actually delved into one of these stories. Whereas we're actually given snapshots of different locations, and we don't have any weight to the overarching story. They're just there to showcase that they have a TV show and nothing else. And that's the part that I think is the most egregious sin of this, is that Disney didn't actually have a plot for this first episode. So they made the plot Din trying to recruit people. That's the long and short of it. And that's my complaint for every other Disney Mandalorian episode, is that every single one of them lacks a real, authentic plot. There are some times where it works out, but I feel like they stumble upon it. Because the ones that really work out, they don't cover up all the episodes that didn't have a plot. And I wish very much that they would have started the entire process by saying, this is the plot. Let's figure out how to get all these different stories to actually contribute to that plot, not just have snapshots around the galaxy. That's my complaint, and it's based upon what they did with this scene, in that this epitomizes their need to just insert something without even really contemplating, does this actually contribute to the story?
I agree. I definitely agree with what you're saying. I don't even know how to word it. Like, throughout this review that we did, I tried to find the best, or at least what Disney was trying to accomplish with this episode, and where they're trying to take this individual story. And even though I found so many things that wasn't, like, I was just questioning. I was like, why were you doing this? This could have been done this way. And there's just, even when you can see the good in what they're doing, you're just like, why did you do it this way? Like, it could have been done in such a much better way. I'm kind of stumbling upon my words right now.
There is something else I would like to... Sorry, say that again?
I said you can take the floor.
Oh, okay. I'm going to take a moment to actually give what I think should have been the plot line for this. I was thinking about having it a dynamic read, but right now I'm realizing it's too disconnected for that just yet. We are going to have that later on, and so you can look forward to that. I don't know if that one will go straight to YouTube just yet, but it is in the process of being created, along with a couple of others. I've been doing rewrites of this series for over a year now, about a year and a half now, actually. And I very much I'm grieved that such great opportunities were thrown away. George Lucas set up so many great aspects of what this story could have become, and it didn't happen. Not one of them has happened. And so I rewrote a lot of these stories with the intention of trying to understand where Disney went wrong, why it feels so very disconnected. And this is more of kind of like what could have been. It's up to you, the viewer, to decide if it was if Disney did this well or if they did poorly. I think that Disney did the best for what they were given, which is usually do it by formula and fit it into these categories and call it good. So we're gonna do a quick let's see. We're gonna do a quick review of what this would have been, and then you can look forward to the full one at a later time, because this has gone on for a while, and we will bring it to an end so that way we hopefully will not take up too much of your time. So thank you everyone for sticking with it as long as you have. So in this alternate rewrite of what the story could have been, this is how I would have actually had it written. Din is struggling to carry on his order. With the death of many Mandalorians, he is taking up the role of armorer. He is new to the skill, and by the way, this is all based upon the other rewrite in which the armor actually perishes in the first season. So, backstory with that, and Boba Fett is actually more involved with this order, and actually would have appeared in season 1. Din is struggling to carry on with his order. With the death of so many Mandalorians, he is taking up the role of armorer. He is new at the skill, and his efforts are crude and unrefined. He's quoting the armorer's lessons as he carries about his work. The role of the armorer is to prepare others to begin their journey on the way. To take that which is unrefined, purify it, and then shape it into and shape it while it's still burning and in pain, folding it, molding it, and then when it's ready, quenching it. Pain is our forge, wisdom is our craftsman, compassion is our quench. When we are cooled, we are then armed and covered with gear. Should we take off any of that armor, we risk being vulnerable again, and death might take us before we have a chance to pass on what we have to another generation. A younger voice says, "Master, is this the way?" Din looks at the small voice, at the child with the small voice, and says, as he's making the helmet for him, "The way is not an object. It's a way of life. We are the remnant of Mandalore's vanguard. We live a way of life that espouses the values of our culture. As its guardians, we are held to a higher standard than that of any other Mandalorian. The way? We embody the way, so that every Mandalorian has something to strive for. When we lose our way, our order can become cold and ruthless. So we must always bind ourselves with reminders of how we are to live. A Mandalorian crest to remind us of our family and home. A helmet to shield our mind from evil thoughts. A breastplate to protect us and our heart. weapons to come to the aid of those who need us. And if any of these are misused, we will lose our way, and thus the way of life every Mandalorian dreams of. The way is to protect our home, defend our culture, care for our people, and build Mandalore's future. In the shadows of the forge, Boba Fett watches with a scowl. Looking at his hand, his ears are filled with a faint gurgling sound that has haunted him regularly, and his hands seem dark with blood. He shuts his eyes, and the sound fades. When he opens his eyes, his hands are clean. Din led the child out of the forge and to carry on with the ceremony. While Boba stayed there in silence. Once in the sun, the child is told to stand in the surf of the sea. Another Mandalorian steps forward to hold the child's helmet, while others look on. Since our home world is destroyed, we wash here. On this world, we seek to rebuild our culture. Your loyalty is to this soil, to this sea, to this world and its people. Till you pass on your mantle to another, you are to keep your armor and helmet on at all times. Do not risk your safety by removing it outside of your home. He took off, the man holding the helmet took off his own to reveal an old man who looked just like Boba Fett, with a pale face and permanent tan marks that wrinkled across his face, showing where the helmet's visor was. Only when you pass on your task to another can you rest. Now I pass on my role to you, to defend Mandalore. He looks at the child and says, "Do you vow to protect our world, our culture, and our people? If so, say, I vow." "I do so vow," the boy cries. The crowd echoed, "He does so vow." The helmet is then placed on the boy's head, and the Mandalorians thump their fists on their chests in a traditional manner of respect. "It's with great honor I pass on my crest to you." He passes a family crest to the boy's armor, where it is locked into place. "Mandalore will rise again." The crowd echoed, "Mandalore has risen." The sound of rumbling is heard, and the crowd looks on. Din asks one of the Mandalorians, "What is that sound?" Suddenly, a monstrous creature comes out of the water. It tries to bite at the boy, but the old man grabs the boy and uses his jetpack to fly the boy out of the water just in time. Another Mandalorian shoots the creature, and the beast turns around to try and bite the armored man and trying to swallow him. Blasters are fired upon the beast from all directions, but the armor of the creature absorbs them all. They're firing and firing, and then suddenly a laser blast and a rocket hit the creature between the eyes, and it drops dead. The Mandalorians help the wounded man out of the creature's mouth, one of them saying, "That's why we never take the armor off." Din turns to see Boba Fett holstering his pistol. "No Mandalorians will be food for a creature of this world. In the future, kill all of these things in the area before another ceremony." Din chases after Boba Fett into the armory. "Boba, how do you know how to kill that thing?" "I taught you how when you were a teen, remember?" "That was for a different creature." "You gotta use an old strategy on a new foe, and it still works." "You've been acting odd ever since you came here. We've invited you, but I didn't know you were going to be so distant. What's eating at you?" Boba glared at Din, pulling out his blaster. "Don't ever say that again." "Boba, it's me. I'm not your enemy." Boba pulls back, staggering a little. "I know that. I'm leaving. I need to return to Tatooine." He disappears through the door. Boba's servant approaches Din. Please understand, the Sarlacc toxin is still in his system. It may be years until he's rid of it. I'm sure he's not ever going to be fully healed. Din nods. Make sure he's well cared for. If it's possible, the servant said as he left. If it's possible, the servant said as he left. Din turned to the old Mandalorian as he entered the room. If you don't need me around here, I think I'll leave as well. First, I need you to see something. The old man pulled out a crystal with Mandalorian script. Ever seen this before? Not that I'm aware of. What is it? Something from Mandalore, a relic. Din falls into a seat. This is a crystal from the surface? Yes. Where did he come by this? A trading post had it. Claimed it was one of a dozen or so. This was the last one. He pointed to the crystal's markings. This means the planet is safe enough to gather resources, including enough Veskar to arm Mandalore for generations. We have been struggling to find Beskar. It's not as common outside of Mandalore as we thought. And once we are in a war, we are going to wish that we had this on hand. Din puts the crystal shard in his pouch. I'll look into it. If I can find a way to the mines or a storehouse, I'll send word. Then, in summary of what happens in the following scenes, Din ends up traveling to try to the mining station in Davaro. The reason why is because he learns that the assassin droid that was used, that had blown up there, actually has been on the planet and actually has a map memorized in his memory banks. And thus, he needs to find a way to restore the droid enough so he can actually take him back. But as he's leaving, he encounters pirates who are taking advantage of the absence of a republic and an empire. They are taking advantage and spreading Hutt power in the absence of the empire. No one knows the real reason for their coming there, and it is left to be a mystery. When Din leaves, when Din leaves, he ends up making a decision that he is going to need to find more resources, more Mandalorians to help him actually get onto the planet. If they can get enough Beskar, then they will have enough to actually rebuild Mandalore on another world. That is how I would have approached this story. I would have actually not had Grogu. I would have had him as had him remain with Luke Skywalker. If he's going to make an appearance, there's going to be a consequence for that later on. And I would have had the pirates actually being manipulated and used by the Hutts in such a way that the audience is left thinking there is a power play that's being made here in the absence of a galactic empire. Any thoughts on that rewrite overview? About any pros or cons? Which one would you go with? Would you go with the one that Disney presented? Would you have gone with something that was presented here? Or would you go with a completely different approach?
I mean, I was good. I think it was good in its own right. I think
that's by the way, is written off of film lore. Just in case anyone watching was curious why the approach was taken. Boba Fett is technically supposed to be passing on the Mandalore lineage, and that's actually based upon something George Lucas wrote years ago with Jango Fett, that he was the last of the Mandalorians. And so to have Boba Fett trying to pass that on, and he's scarred, would add a lot of tension, add a lot of interest. And then you have the danger of a coming conflict, a need for the Mandalorians to rush to actually arm themselves. Gives them a reason to return to Mandalore. Gives them a reason to try and rebuild their fallen culture. So that's where the inspiration comes from. They're rediscovering the way.
Yeah, if they're good, it's good. I don't think it would work with what Disney's trying to do, but that doesn't. That that's because Disney's not trying to do things based on the lore and stuff.
There are
But
so many different ways Disney could
yeah,
have
it's done
taken
right.
this.
It's much better.
But yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I pay rolling chairs to say that, folks. No. But there's so many different ways you could have approached this story. And
I get $3 an hour.
there's so many ways that you could have approached the story. And unfortunately, it's like every opportunity that Disney could have taken with the story didn't actually happen. And I look forward, honestly, to seeing how they unfold this season. Mostly because I still have hope that they could actually make something that's memorable, that stands out. I don't think they've done that yet. I don't think they will do it, but I can hope for that. If nothing else, I know there's a lot of people that are enjoying it. And that's probably the takeaway I want to give. For example, Rolling Chairs and I have very different opinions about where it comes to films versus the animated series. We both enjoy a different aspect of the exact same content. Both of them cannot necessarily, both of them do not mesh well together. The lore of both worlds does not permit that. But it has also allowed for a different audience to actually be served, and people actually enjoy all those aspects. The part that I feel like a lot of fans of the past struggle with Disney is that Disney is doing the exact same thing for a different audience. And I have met some of those people that truly do love Disney's approach, to the point of where they would not watch anything before Disney Star Wars. I know it might sound a little strange to folks, but I have met people that are like that. They have a completely different viewpoint, and I disagree with that. But I can respect it enough to know that they're going to have those opinions, and we both have just like a different story entirely. Now, I wish very much, because I am a lore writer, that they would have incorporated a lot of these elements into the story so that it would have served all audiences. But they're not doing that. Disney is not the one that's trying to blend them together. They're trying to stitch them together. And so you see a patchwork. We will see in the years to come if that worked out or not. But one thing that you should be aware of is that it actually is working out financially for them. It's not well known, but Disney Star Wars actually is finding success. And learning to appreciate what other people have come to love is important to understanding the whole story. It's important to being able to actually convey other views and opinions. And so just remember that as you see some of this content that comes out, that it's not actually designed for all the audiences. It's designed for one audience in particular, and it's throwing in Easter eggs so the rest of the audiences feel like they have something to look forward to. Bastion says paid pennies by the hour. Yeah, pennies by the hour. That's Twitch ad revenue. But for those that are watching,
He gives me a rolling chair every evening. That's all I need.
Rolling chair. Yep. For those who are watching, is there a particular part of Disney's Star Wars that you prefer, or is there, are you a lore person like myself that prefers the original content, or are you someone who more prefers the interim between Lucas's works in Disney. It'd be curious because I know some folks that they prefer, first and foremost, the books. And as Lucas said, it's not actually something you can mesh well with the movies. The books do not line up with the lore that he's built. But that also serves another audience. So that's why I technically put them in the same category as those that like the animated series. But you technically could put them into their own camp as well. And we will see what happens in the coming days if this show is going to actually be tailored more to the Disney side or to some of those people in the past. All right. Anything else that you would like to add, Rolling Chairs, before we start to wrap this up?
I hope you all show up for the upcoming weeks of this. It was a lot of fun. Just two buddies talking about Star Wars, and I hope you enjoy it.
All right. Haas says prefer the original Star Wars. That is definitely a sentiment that a great many people would concur with. I actually knew someone who changed. They loved the original, and then they actually came to love the animated series. I also knew somebody who liked the animated series, then suddenly started liking the Disney stuff. Different content for different audiences. But as we wrap up, just a reminder, this is our new approach. We're going to be trying to diversify the content. We're going to be going with stuff for Twitch. We're going to be doing stuff for YouTube. And this series is the introduction to that. And so it's going to become more structured moving forward. So that way you know more what to expect. You'll have a chance to maybe create some of your own questions and present them along the way. Maybe some of your own views that you want to just post so people can be aware of it. Bastion says, I wish there was more bounty hunting in these shows of these bounty hunters. So actually that gets to an interesting point. Originally, as I understand in Lucas's vision, bounty hunting was actually a step down for Mandalorians. And so thus, Jango Fett was a rebel. He was breaking from his order. He was focusing on himself rather than his order because, at least in terms to what Lucas was hinting at, he was the last of the Mandalorians. There was no one else. Now, that does not mesh with the image given in Clone Wars. That does not mesh with what Disney has given us. But the idea is that he was the last one, and he was a bitter man because he had lived to see the end of his order. And so thus, when the clone army was being made, in his mind, he thought, well, there's a chance now to pass on this vision of Mandalore to another generation. So thus he had Boba Fett cloned so that he would be able to embody what he could not be. Now, that story, to me, is far more compelling. But so it has not happened. And it's more, there's more money to have a Mandalorian culture that is separate rather than having reforged. Now, granted, there is some great opportunities once you get to the sequel trilogies where you could actually have payoff for stuff like this. But it doesn't do well for when you're trying to go back in time. It only pays if you move forward. And so thus, we have this story falling apart in place of other narratives for the Star Wars universe. But we'll travel into that a little bit more next time as we explore more of what the story could have become. Well, we are going to end off there. Thank you, everyone, for participating, for coming over and listening in. It is much appreciated. And we will see you all next time, both over here on Twitch as well as YouTube. There will be a stream later on this evening for those who are on the Twitch side. It will not be streamed to YouTube. And so look forward to some of those game activities tonight. Chat with you all later.